All right, we're just going to go ahead and get started. First of all, I want to thank everyone who has joined, and we know that with everyone working remotely today, you've probably got more webinars on your calendars than you've got time to join them, so we appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join ours. Joining me today is Craig Hypes, the Principal Technical Marketing Engineer from Ordr. I am Coulter Etzhoken, a Security Engineer from Check Point, and we're going to be your guides through the world of IoT, the threats faced in the world of IoT, and how you can take control of your environments and protect yourselves from those kind of threats. IoT devices aren't just the devices that we're all aware of, the devices you see every day on your way into the office, or the devices that are advertised to be the IoT devices. I'm sure you see the IP cameras, the smartphone sitting in the conference room if you're working in your office building. If you're in more of an industrial capacity, you've got your robots, you've got your tablets, you've got your remote devices that are part of your everyday job in manufacturing or industrial areas. When it gets into the medical industry, it becomes even more intense with potentially multiple devices within a single hospital room that are all communicating with the network and all are unprotected. And as this area of technology continues to evolve, it's going to encompass more and more of the technology that we use in our daily lives, including stoplights, the traffic cameras, door entry codes, these kind of things that we might not even think about, including like the new Peloton exercise bike that the CEO just put into his office. These are all devices that are connected and communicating on networks and provide zero protection for themselves. Based upon some research done by Check Point Research Department, we've established that there's kind of an average number of devices for each vertical in the industry is using IoT. We see exponentially more IoT devices being used than even people employed by these companies in these different industries. This research has also led us to some information that about 67% of these organizations have already experienced some kind of malicious attack or corruption of their IoT devices. One of the more common ones that we're seeing is actually exploiting these devices and using them as crypto miners in the background. These devices are vulnerable as, there's so many different types of them. You can't use the same kind of measures you use on an oil rig as you do on an MRI machine. So the fact that they use different protocols, that they're using different kind of ways to communicate on your network makes them increasingly more difficult to protect with traditional security means. Not to mention that these devices are old. They could be running on systems and firmware versions that are no longer being updated. They might run on systems that are impossible to include security on. There's no way to patch them. There's no way to increase their protection levels at all. Not to mention, within especially the medical field, especially in industrial fields, you find lots of devices that require protections in the fields. So they're utilizing weak or no passwords at all to keep them safe. And anyone can gain access physically or virtually. Just the other day, personally, I was in a doctor's office and the terminal there was completely unlocked. And, it was a good thing that I was a good person and not someone with a malicious virus on a USB in my pocket, because all it takes is a couple of minutes unattended in the room with that terminal. And these are not potential threats that we're only talking about. We see these kind of attacks happening right now in all industries. They're just increasing more and more every day. And as I said, one of the more common ones that we're seeing is the crypto miner malware that's being installed on these devices and utilizing unused performance and bandwidth to actually make the malicious attackers richer. Even something as innocuous as smart light bulbs being used in your office, your home, your industrial complex. These kind of things just basically give attackers an access point from which they can gain lateral movement into your networks and potentially corrupt more devices within either your corporate network or your potentially, ideally, segmented network for your IoT devices. At Check Point and with our third-party partners, we've made it our mission to try and protect these devices and protect the networks that they're linked to, either by providing on-device or on-location security. And if these on location on-premises IoT devices do get corrupted, then in turn protecting the networks that they're connected to from propagation of that infection. And to that end, I'd like to introduce Checkpoint IoT Protect. It would be our new named solution for this kind of protection and securities that Checkpoint provides. We focus this solution on three main pillars: the discovery of these devices, the segmentation of your network for protections between the different types of devices, and the IoT prevention of threats rather than just the detection of them. Going into the discovery and risk analysis pillar, this is where our friends in Ordr excel by identifying all of the IoT type devices on your network and providing detailed information, including IP, MAC, manufacturer, location, firmware version, specific threats that these kind of things will give them a risk score that you can potentially identify in your policies depending upon your admins and their preferences. Checkpoint can in turn take this information that is gathered by Ordr and generate an executive level firmware risk assessment report. Now, this is a free report that we can actually run before you've decided on anything, giving you more visibility into your IoT environment and the threats you're facing there. The second pillar of zero trust segmentation involves more of a separation between your IT, IoT, OT networks. With Checkpoint, you do this in the way of managing your policies and the granularity of those policies. So by separating policies that control, your IP cameras from your other devices, such as, remote devices. For example, I'll dip into the medical realm of, let's say you don't want the MRI machines being run by the same policies as your IP cameras. They run on different protocols. You have different access times and different access administrators potentially. So, you want to keep those separate within your policies so that they don't communicate with each other and gain lateral access. These policies can be diversified into however your administrators want to do that according to their preferences. Whether you identify them by their protocol, whether you identify them by the type of device, whether you identify them by the administrator that accesses those specific devices. These kind of things are all included in the Checkpoint management of the enforcement policy that you'll be managing these devices with. Now, the third pillar of the threat prevention piece is more evolved around the on-device protections. So these older devices that I discussed before can't potentially be patched. So what Checkpoint does is, by utilizing our known knowledge of known threats, we are able to virtually patch these devices and provide on-device level protection so that known exploits can't be used. No matter what types of devices these are, whether they're industrial, smart building, medical devices, we have a very large, basically encyclopedia, basically database knowledge center of all of these different threats, known threats and exploits of these devices. And we're able to instigate working with the vendors on device runtime protection, which you may have heard the term nano agent. Basically, we inject firmware into these devices, like I said, working in conjunction with the vendors of the devices, the manufacturers of the devices, to basically identify any out of the ordinary behavior that is happening by running the virtual patching software that we can inject on these devices. It basically provides the protections on these devices and for these devices that they're not able to provide for themselves. This is in basic alignment with our ideals of preventing the attack rather than just detecting it. No matter where your devices are located on your network, whether they're in your primary smart building, smart office, in your data center, we have the gateways to handle that. Whether they're oil rigs out in the middle of a field somewhere, we have ruggedized gateways that can connect through 4G connections, 5G connections potentially on the roadmap. This can also run through ISP providers, so you don't actually need a physical network presence at these remote sites. We can do it virtually through CloudGuard, and as I talked about before, the on-device runtime protection, which basically provides those virtual patching and nano agent runtime protections on the IoT devices themselves. So what I'm going to do right now is I'll switch over to my demo environment, and I'll give you guys an idea of what it looks like when we integrate with the Ordr discovery engine. So what we're looking at right here is the R8040 Smart Console. This is where our single pane of glass management system, where you can manage all of your checkpoint security solutions, from physical gateways to virtual gateways to our IoT solution. So what it looks like here in our object list when you're integrating initially with the discovery service is you'll get a little window that you can name according to your admin's naming conventions. This can pretty much be anything. You'll give your server address for your discovery service and a pre-shared key that the discovery service engine already has. Now, once you've done this, it'll upload this IoT controller object. Once you have this, you can basically import anything that IoT discovery engine, in this case we're working with Ordr, which gives you all the detailed objects, which can be then in a Google style search, identify anything on that network, be it IP camera for device or Rockwell per manufacturer. Not only can we import these objects directly, but they can be drag and dropped into policies that are automatically generated initially for all the manufacturers' device types or protocols that you've specified. This was, as it says, auto-generated. It basically created these basic rules for allowing the traffic from the devices on your network, which can then be dug into by your admins and blocked or accepted according to the type of traffic or the type of protocol or the type of area, be it external, internal, DMZ traffic that you'd like to block. Now, once you've got these policies in place and you're controlling the traffic to your IoT devices, you have the ability to view them in our logs by a smart event. Again, you can search by the type of device or the manufacturer or the type of area that it's in. It'll come up and it'll identify it as cameras, camera server, camera access. Not only can you see the logs here, which can all be expanded, which give you that forensics and security information, we also have an overview of all of your IoT collection on that information. And now this gives you basic, the executive level overview of all the activity that can be monitored in real time. And with that, I'm going to hand you over to Craig, who's going to give us a deep dive into the Ordr side of things.
Thanks, Colton. Let me go ahead and share my desktop. And so I'll continue on the conversation with, now that we know that these devices are out there, we understand the risks and the fact that we have a very powerful solution for providing the segmentation and control and the virtual patching of these things. We'll now get into some of the details of how do we provide that rich visibility and segmentation intelligence and infuse that into the checkpoint solution. So some of the core challenges of dealing with IoT, OT devices, the blanket of terms of things that don't have agents, they don't authenticate to the network, they don't necessarily and often do not have some type of user behind them, but they're connecting to your network. So the first, there's different challenges and from just inventorying what's on my network. Are they behaving normally? Are they behaving as expected? And then how do I wrap a policy and then get to enforcement? So drilling down a little bit, so it's very common that in most organizations, you may not have a full inventory. Things are getting connected, so even if they bypass procurement or you have different teams that are each managing a portion of the tracking, so you have facilities management maybe tracking some of the facility devices, you have desktop teams that are watching user-driven desktop machines or mobile device managers tracking user things, but to have a consolidated view that's integrated is something that is often lacking. And how do you onboard net new devices? Another challenge is once they connect to the network, is understanding if they're actually behaving the way they should. What's normal versus abnormal behavior, which devices are at risk, which things are actually involved in some type of threat activity. And because of the variation of the types of things they're connecting, it's very difficult to track, which then leads us into the policy. What should that policy be? Because my infusion pumps in a healthcare organization do not behave the same as maybe another medical device on the network. If it's a heating ventilation system, it has a unique behavior from my security camera. So constantly tracking what is the actual behavior of each one of those is a daunting task to do that manually. And then finally, how do we actually provide some real segmentation, put some teeth into this that says, even if once I do trust their access to the network, how do I make sure that they're only doing the things that they need to do, are not vulnerable to being compromised, especially, again, these are things that don't have agents, they very thin, if you will, from a kernel level, aren't getting patched. How do I provide those protections? And if there are compromises, how do I prevent them from contaminating or having access to other systems? So with Ordr, we're going to satisfy and help drive the visibility of that inventory. So without agents, we will passively discover all of the things on the network with high resolution details like the make, the model, the serial number. We'll provide and become that data lake for the assets, integrating with your existing asset management system and other tooling, but also reconciling what is actually connected to the network compared to what you thought may have been connected, and being able to create an onboarding process for net new devices. The next piece is watching and understanding the behavior, understanding what a security camera and what a security camera in your environment should be doing, or an MRI, or a PLC. Very specifically, what is the behavior of those devices in your environment? Are they behaving normally? Do I have, 1,000 cameras doing, one thing as expected, and one or two that are doing things that I don't expect? And then being able to risk score based on their vulnerability and their threat activity, every device. Let's take that device intelligence and now map it to network intelligence. Where do they exist on the network? Where are the communications emanating from? Where are they communicating to understand where they exist and what are the policies that need to be put around these things to provide the necessary protections. And so that leads into the segmentation. How do I provide prescriptive guidance around segmentation that isn't guesswork or based on exhaustive hours of doing manual inspection of the behavior and then trying to apply some type of policy around them? And we'll show that through the demonstration, how we can automate these functions. I won't get into too much detail here, but often when people see how much information that we're able to derive from the system passively, it's well, how'd you do that? Where's the magic? Well, beyond just looking at things on the network in terms of what I call the artifacts, what's the network card, and looking at DHCP information that a lot of traditional profiling or fingerprinting systems do, we actually crack open the packet. So we're looking at actual traffic flows passively and being able to discern if it's DICOM for healthcare or BACnet for building automation or some other protocol that's specific to those devices, and being able to ferret out the rich context of what it is and what it's actually doing on the network. That gets reconciled with your existing asset management system. So you can now make sure that the information that you've been tracking is whole, and there's certain information you may be tracking in your asset management system, that such as when is the warranty, when was this device purchased, who owns this device, if there's a problem, who gets the call, and being able to create that data lake of information. That's combined with Ordr's global intelligence. We've seen millions of devices on the network. We've classified many millions of devices, and infusing that into our predictive device profiling engine to actually come up and provide a clear understanding of what each device is on the network, as well as ferret out the behavior, what we call the flow genome. What is the essence, the communications behavior of these devices? What do they need to do on the network? Now we're going to take that device intelligence and then map it to your network. So we'll get network intelligence from your existing network management tools, or just communicating and reaching out to those devices, which users are logging into the network. All that information is combined to provide a clear understanding of where things are, how the communications are traversing your network, and pulling that together so that we can generate and provide automated policy provisioning that can be enforced through your existing infrastructure. And certainly a key use case here today is how can we augment and provide that information to your checkpoint security management servers. And often in the segmentation journey, I look at firewalls as that low-hanging fruit. The best place that you can say, how do I stop the hemorrhaging of potential data leakage or attacks from outside my network? What is the one purpose-built system for doing very detailed level of segmentation? And that is, in this case, your security gateways. So being able to infuse that information about things that are connecting, and then being able to automate the policy generation, as well as if you have things like network access control, to be able to provide a more localized segmentation policy that's in sync, that they're not competing or conflicting. So I'll give you an idea of what we mean by visibility. We're not just saying, hey, there's a device on the network and it looks like an Axis, a device made by this company called Axis. No, we're providing specifically, it's a network camera. Here's the manufacturer, the model. In many cases, we'll ferret out things like the serial number and the operating system information with detail. What type of device, what category, what broader category? Because realize that all of this information is going to be published and pushed into or collected by the security management platform and Checkpoint to be able to now provide rich policy provisioning based on this information, including security analytics. So maybe my policy when a device appears to be at low risk is one level, but things that are at extremely high risk or at critical levels or are compromised will get a different policy. And then understanding where those devices are on the network, which location, what is the network device that it's connected to, its current VLAN or SSID, where is it specifically if it's a switch interface, because this is critical to maintain this understanding, to have a security policy in, say, the security management gateways that are consistent. So regardless of where they get plugged into the network, we will be able to inform the system to say, this is where this device is today. It might have had this IP address yesterday, but here it just moved or got reprovisioned elsewhere, or there's 3 more of these security cameras in this case that just got added to the network. And by the way, here's the current information. So when you see them hit the firewall, they can apply the right policy. And that right policy is predicated on the knowledge of what these devices do as far as what's normal behavior and what's abnormal behavior. So this is our flow genome, and I'll show this in the demo, that will actually provide details about every device at multiple levels. So at individual device, what does this device do? What do all security cameras of the same type do? What are things of a just general security devices or facility or healthcare? What are they doing on my network and what needs to happen to protect them, as well as to keep them from doing things they shouldn't do? So that flow genome is our basis for establishing what's anomalous on the network. Again, this is unique to each customer environment. And then being able to translate that into a language that can be understood by the Checkpoint security management server, and then have that automatically proliferated to the appropriate firewalls. I'm going to step back for a moment, because this, when we talk about protection of devices on the network, there's two common approaches. And if you look at this, metaphor of a zoo that says, hey, I have all these things that are potentially in the zoo, but this is often a good metaphor for networks, right? You have all these things that are connected to your network, but there is no necessarily any specific or prescriptive order. And so really what you need to do is to determine a way to provide some type of grouping, some top-level governance that says, I want to, in this example, separate herbivores from my carnivores. I might have devices with, or in this case, animals which are particularly at risk or endangered, high value or high criticality that need to be separated from other animals in the zoo. But at the same time, there's often the cases where each of these animals need to be attended to by a zookeeper or a vet. So there's going to be interactions that need to occur between different groups at different times. So just by putting everything in one group isn't the end all, right? Because you can say, well, I am going to have all those exception cases where now let's relate this to a network of enterprise devices where a patient monitor needs to be communicating with a nurse's workstation, or I have a security camera that needs to talk to some video recorder centrally in my data center. And there's all of those exceptions. And you could also argue, does the zebra actually need to interact with the elephant? And if we translate that into network speak, does one light bulb need to talk to another IP-enabled light bulb? Does one ultrasound machine need to talk to another ultrasound, and so on? So you get the idea that there's this need as well for a micro-segmentation or a bottoms-up approach that says there are things that have very unique requirements and I need to limit their access. So I usually group that into two general groups where you have those things which could go anywhere on your network. And they are the things that you want to typically provide that top-level governance to say, of all the things, say, a user workstation could do, I want to contain them and limit so that they can't do certain things. And contrast that to, if you look at a IoT or OT device, they have very specific requirements on the network. So being able to translate that and say, only allow the HVAC to do what the HVAC system needs to do, or that healthcare, or that PLC, or that security camera, and only allow them to do what they need to do on the network. And so that's where we're going to provide that level of intelligence, and it can be automated as well as properly secured, whether it's a top-down or a bottoms-up approach, through your checkpoint security management platform. So here you're seeing a campus network with all the things that could connect. You have data center resources. You have things that are outside in the internet, and positioning these security gateways to be able to provide that very high level of degree of top-down and bottoms-up segmentation at these key junction points within the network. Ordr will receive data directly from the network, and it can be multiple types of feeds and sources, but that is the information that feeds into our analytics engine and then is published through the IoT controller to provide that rich visibility as well as the information about segmentation. So whether it's hey, I have a policy that should apply to all facility devices, a top-down approach, or a very prescriptive policy that says, I have a very specific point-of-sale machine or device that only needs to access the PCI servers and nothing else, and I need to have a very prescriptive policy. We can automate that both types of rules through the checkpoint security management system. Visibility, well, Culture has already provided, some screenshots, an actual live demo of some of that visibility, but, what type of device, what's its name, what's the IP currently, what's its function, the manufacturer, the location, including there's things like risk level and its operating system that now become all of the elements against which I can apply policy, either from a top-down approach, or we'll see how we can do that in an automated fashion. So if I look at IoT segmentation here, Ordr has, in this particular example, this is our flow genome where we show for every one of these little stair steps in this spiral staircase is a different thing in this case, this picker CT scanner has communicated with. Its IP, the ports, the protocols, how many devices within this group of the total are doing this, where they're communicating with. So you see this device, they're communicating things like DICOM to a PAC server and other elements in the network. But being able to translate that information and say, let's now enforce policies at our checkpoint firewall. We've already translated this into an ACL style language that can be enforced into these policies in the IoT layer. So through a click of a button, being able to say these are the policies to actually make true zero trust, true microsegmentation, to put the teeth into the enforcement of these devices when they connect and they go through the various gateways in the system. And of course, you've got that rich virtual patching intelligence that's also being applied to the traffic that has been permitted to make sure that there's no threats within the traffic that is permitted. I consider this the next big wave. You know, there's been many milestones, I think, and if you look at the evolution of firewall technology, you know, back in the late 90s, we had net translation was a big topic. Then it was getting beyond just ports and protocols and doing application, you know, deeper into the inspecting of packets and UTM, unifying IPS and firewalling into one platform. The next big one was things like identity-based firewalling. How can I associate users and user-based things to a policy in my firewall? Now this is doing just that, but for your IoT and OT devices, I'm applying an identity. I'm applying some clarity of what these things are for these things that don't have users, and now allowing you to create a policy based on these devices, and so that the different security gateways know exactly what those devices are and apply the right policy. And now you have the ability to have that consistent policy across multiple layers of your network. So with that, I want to switch to a demo. And here is an example where you're seeing that we have discovered everything on the network. It's not just a, hey, we just discovered some manufacturing devices or just the medical devices. There's some solutions out there that will focus only on one. As any organization should want to see everything with high resolution clarity about what those are, whether it's a networking, your user workstations, the building automation. You're seeing a lot of these are becoming very suspicious because of the vulnerabilities in these personal assistants and their ability to record conversations. But certainly you see the full gamut of different types of devices that can be discovered across and are present in essentially all networks. So how do I get, the goal here is how do I take that information and provide that rich visibility on multiple levels? So whether it's you know, based on, you know, knowing what type of device it is, what part of the network they're in. This is showing you how many devices are in each one of these different categories. Let's just look at facility devices. And I'm going to look at one particular. Here is a device that might be on any one of your networks. It's some type of you know, control device that's controlling a part of the network. We're seeing detailed information about the manufacturer, model, serial numbers, what operating system, classification, any risk. In this case, it's normal, as well as its location. And then imagine having that information now being automatically published into your security management system. Also knowing where it's been on the network. Again, this is critical because we were actually looking through all its history and saying, where's this device been? And we can see what its IP address. But if it changes, we'll inform the security gateway and say, oh, this device now has a new address. So you're accurately tracking devices at the firewalls and applying the right policies. What are these devices supposed to be doing on my network? And here we're seeing the communications pattern for these devices, who they're talking to with very deep in detail about when they occurred. So this is, when we drive behavioral analysis in policy, it's based on real evidence. It's not based on guesswork or what the vendor thought it could do, what it might do. It's based on what it's actually doing and then correlating that to security details. Let's take an example of that. So I might have a policy that says I need to lock down or control Windows 7 devices. Now here are all my Windows 7 devices on my network. And then again, being able to get information about these particular devices and saying, how do I provide controls around them? And I'm going to show one last example because again, all of this information, like operating system version, the type of device, the categorization, is all information that is going to be available to you now in your security management platform. So what about risk? So I have devices at different risk levels, and being able to say, oh, I've got a medical device, and being able to say it's running an old operating system, there's a number of security incidents, it's potentially a Trojan, being able to pull that information and feed that detail as risk into your security management platform. So now we've just established that we have all this rich data that is now being able to be published to the security management platform, and is now available to you for generating policy. So I now want to move into the one other area, which is showing you that from a high-level view, which is here's all the different types of devices, things like medical or PLCs, building automation, retail devices. Everything is automatically grouped. Seeing all the things within your data center and things that are outside your network. And being able to say, oh, I have some of these point-of-sale devices in my network, retail devices, and I see that I have communications. Not only are they outside my network, but they're actually going to bad places. So let me click on that. And then being able to quickly see that I have a credit card reader that's talking out to China. Obviously, that would be something that someone would want to clamp down on. And the way you would normally protect those devices to begin with so that communication never occurred, is I'd want to push that as a policy to my firewall. So let's get into how do we protect things using the intelligence of Ordr in combination with this very powerful security gateway enforcement platform. So here I have a couple devices where I have some policy that was generated for my IP phones on my network. I have a number of different types of devices that have been published onto the system. And I'm going to now say, let's push policy. I'm going to shift over to a system where I have a number of UPS systems I've discovered. And Ripple 20 is very top of mind right now, and I've learned that these devices are susceptible and are vulnerable to Ripple 20. So here's a case where I can say, you know what? I want to see what these devices do, and here's what they're doing. I can see that there's some communications. Yellow means didn't expect that to happen. I didn't expect it to communicate, in this case, SNMP to this device. So that, by default, is not part of my baseline. But these other communications were expected and have been authorized. So not only will I get alerted, but I can say, let's put a wrapper. Let's put a policy. Notice that and I'm going to translate this into a language that your security management system and other systems can understand. Notice that the things that were unexpected are not part of my baseline. If I really wanted to tune that, I could. Someone could say, oh, there is an exception, we're going to allow that, or we're not going to allow that. But let's make this into reality. So here's my ACL, and now I'm going to generate my policy for my checkpoint. It's right at the very bottom here, but you can see it's actually the language that the checkpoint security management platform needs to enforce that policy. And I could do a copy and paste and get that policy and hand it over. Or I could say, you know what, enforce those policies at the firewall. And you will see, and it'll take just a few seconds, but the point here is you're now seeing that that policy for those UPS systems to protect them from Ripple 20 and other attacks is now put into place. So that policy, that identification, micro-segmentation, to allow these devices to only do what they need to do on my network and nothing more. And that is certainly, I'd say that the true power of this integration is being able to provide this immensely powerful segmentation platform. The thing that I would actually say most customers should be looking at as their first line of defense to their data center and campus firewalling and to their branch locations and to the internet edge, and saying, how do I make sure at a minimum that I have high level the detailed protections I need, and do it in a very scalable way, because that's what these systems are designed for being able to provide granular segmentation across the entire network. And so here we're seeing those rich details, not only of what things are, again, I call this, IoT-based firewalling as an extension beyond what we used to call user identity-based firewalling. I'm giving identity to all of these things that connect without a user or an agent, and now being able to provide some teeth to segment them, and then giving the knowledge, the prescriptive recipe for providing their protections. So with that, I'm just going to shift back and provide the summary here of some of those key benefits. And I think certainly it's in the high definition classification, the fact that it's passive, we're not relying on any agents, it's holistic, it's for everything that connects, and then being able to provide that rich context into the security management server. Being able to provide an ongoing security assessment, and then being able to augment the security analytics from the checkpoint controller in terms of risk, providing an understanding of, are my IoT and OT devices, are they behaving as normal? Are there exceptions? So you can zero in on things that need to be segmented and protected. And then certainly there's the advancements with the virtual patching with the checkpoint management platform, that providing the correlation of my IoT devices to IoT specific IPS and IDS signatures. And then I think another key benefit is that I've always seen firewall, the administration of that, always challenged by the fact that you often had to tell the users that they must put their devices in certain VLANs or subnets so that the firewall could apply the right policy. Now you don't have to lock your devices to specific parts, to specific VLANs or subnets. We will manage that awareness so that the checkpoint security management platform always knows which device, what IP it currently has, so that it gets the right policy regardless of its network location. And then providing the automation for microsegmentation, putting, again, I call it the teeth into protecting things that beyond just monitoring and reacting, being proactive so that you can provide the necessary controls for all of these things which are connecting to your network. So with that, I'd like to open it up for questions.
And I see we had one question in the Q&A already. I think that, Craig, you might be able to give us a little bit more light on this. So how do you protect and monitor IoT devices like LoRa sensors, which have MAC devices but not IP? I would assume that's more of along the lines of the discovery, and as long as we can discover it, Checkpoint would be able to enforce upon the MAC or the type of device it is, not necessarily using the IP.
Well, great question. I will say that our focus is on IP devices that are IP enabled, that do have an IP address to provide protections into the system. What we do see, though, is often you might have devices which have a MAC address, or they have another type of connection, media connection to the network, but then are connecting through some type of IP-enabled gateway, an IoT gateway. So we are able to discern the things that are connected behind an IP gateway or IoT gateway based on the unique communications within. That's where the traffic inspection comes in, being able to say, oh, this communication is coming from this particular device, and provide the prescriptive guidance around what's normal for those devices, as well, in addition to the visibility of those devices, as well as providing the segmentation policy for them.
And then as far as enforcing on like on-prem, on-device on those devices, it would have to be an integration with the manufacturer and Checkpoint in order to run the virtual patching nano agent injection. But you could still designate policy once a discovery engine like Ordr identified what was communicating with those IP-based gateways. If anybody else has any questions, please feel free to throw it into the Q&A. How does Ordr get licensed, and how does Checkpoint get licensed? You want to go first, Craig?
So I will say, so we have an agreement with Checkpoint so that you can actually purchase this solution directly from Checkpoint, and it is based on the number of in the case of healthcare, the number of beds or the number of IP addresses. So it is in chunks based on how you would how many, again, depending on the type of organization, but it is based ultimately, it's a correlation to how many devices you're trying to manage.
And like you said, you can get them both from one vendor, and
yeah, that's correct.
And it's individual for industrial, enterprise, or medical industry. So it won't be the same across the board. And if anybody has any, follow-up questions on licensing or pricing, or is interested in that, please feel free to reach out to me personally. Let me throw my contact information up here. So at any point, if you have any questions about Checkpoint's IoT solutions or anything else related to Checkpoint, please reach out to me and I can follow up with any data sheets. If you're interested in the free firmware assessment that I discussed during our presentation, you'll be prompted with a survey once you log out of this Zoom meeting, with Zoom webinar. We would appreciate if you take a few minutes to fill that out, as it helps us kind of adjust and evolve these webinar presentations into something that's more helpful and informative for you, our audience, as you are the reason that we provide all this, so that you can be informed on new events, new solutions, and new threats facing our IT infrastructure, IoT infrastructure, as it were. So if anybody has any more questions, please throw them in the Q&A. Craig, did you have anything else to wrap up?
No, just that certainly we certainly welcome any follow-up questions, demonstrations, or leading to a very quick POC. This can be, the value can be demonstrated in short order, and no pun intended. It is a true plug-and-play type operation. Like I said, it's passive. There's no agents required. So within hours, you start seeing that rich visibility, and that visibility can then be very quickly be represented within your security management platform, within your security management server, so that you can see now a new level of visibility into things that you never had direct visibility into before.
Well, if there's no more questions, I want to say thank you everybody for joining and give you a few minutes back in your day, probably to join another webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.